Hey, BTR1389 here. Time for another review/history lesson on a firearm, and today we have a pistol you might have heard of, some of you might have, the Glock 19. First off, let's do a safety check. No round in the chamber, no magazine in the gun, and both magazines are empty. As always, I'll start with the history behind it first. In 1980, the Austrian military wanted to replace their aging World War II era Walther P38s with a modern service pistol. They had a list of 17 criteria that must be met in order for the pistol to even be considered, and that is as follows. The design must be self-loading. The pistol must fire the NATO standard 9mm Parabellum round. The magazine cannot require any means of assistance for loading. The magazine must have a minimum capacity of 8 rounds. All actions necessary to prepare the pistol for firing and any actions required after firing must be done single-handed, either right or left-handed. The pistol must be absolutely secure against accidental discharge from shock and drops from a height of 2 meters onto a steel plate. Disassembly and reassembly of the main parts must be possible without the use of any tools. Maintenance and cleaning of the pistol must be possible without the use of tools. The pistol's construction may not exceed 58 individual parts. That was because the Walther P38 had 58 parts and they wanted fewer. Gauges, measuring, and precise testing devices must not be necessary for long-term maintenance of the pistol. The manufacturer is required to provide the Ministry of Defense with a complete set of drawings, engineering drawings, and exploded views. All components must be fully interchangeable between pistols. That meant everything had to be milled or stamped, no handmade parts. No more than 20 malfunctions are permitted during the first 10,000 test-fired rounds. Not even minor jams that can be cleared without the use of tools. So, for example, nothing big like if a cartridge gets jammed in there or nothing like that. But for minor examples, you can't have failure to feeds, failure to ejects, or something like a stovepipe is a failure to eject. And if you don't know what a stovepipe is, that's when a round gets caught up like that, which prevents it from cycling properly, which is bad. So none of that. After firing 15,000 rounds of standard ammunition, the pistol will be fired with an overpressure cartridge generating 73,000 psi. Now that's twice that of a normal 9mm round. And that was just a check to see if there were any cracks in the frame or if critical damage will be done from that overpressure cartridge. When handled properly, under no circumstances may the user be endangered by case ejection, so pretty much make cases fly away from the user, no brass ejecting into people's faces. The muzzle energy must be at least 441.5 joules of energy when firing a standard round. That mainly has to do with barrel length, because if you have a longer barrel, gases have more time to expand and more time to push the round out of the barrel at a higher velocity and with more energy. Glock also use a different type of barrel that's more efficient, but I'll talk about that later. Pistols scoring less than 70% of the total available points will not even be considered for military use. Well, in 1982, after hearing about the military's need for a new pistol, a polymer engineer by the name of Gaston Glock assembled a team of experts in the military, police department, and civilian sports shooting fields to design a pistol that had the most desirable characteristics. He actually bought a bunch of pistols to take apart because he was a polymer engineer and really didn't have any firearms experience. Well, it only took them 3 months to come out with a working prototype, and this prototype made heavy use of synthetics and modern manufacturing techniques. This not only made the pistol much lighter than normal-sized pistols, but also much more cost-effective to make. They called it the Glock 17 because it was the 17th patent the company held. It was submitted to the trials in 1982, passed all the necessary tests, and eventually won the competition, outperforming 5 other very large manufacturing companies. And these companies were Heckler & Koch, Steyr, FN Herstal, Sig Sauer, and Beretta. None of those companies are small companies. This little startup beat out all of those. So initially, the Austrian military ordered 25,000 of these Glock 17s under the new name P80 or Pistola 80. This adoption by the Austrians sparked interest in the rest of Western Europe and then into the United States. And the United States was particularly interested in this new pistol because they were looking for a replacement for the M1911, which had been in service for more than 70 years, and they wanted a higher capacity, pistol. They wanted difference. As it's a hot topic, I'm not going to get into that. Not long after that, the Norwegian and Swedish militaries adopted the Glock 17 for use in the military, but that was only after the pistol had passed all NATO standards and was given full NATO certification. In the mid-'80s, U.S. police officers were severely outgunned, specifically by drug traffickers, because they were still using revolvers. So, as a response to that, the Glock U.S. division started marketing this new Glock 17 to police officers, noting that it had a much higher capacity. It was 17 rounds versus 6 compared to a revolver, and it was much easier to maintain. When police departments began adopting the Glock 17, it triggered a wave of false media claims that said that the pistol was invisible to X-ray machines and metal detectors because it was partially made of plastic. I mean, it's just silly. Most of the frame is plastic, but it still has little bits in it, and the rest of it is all metal. So it was silly, and it boosted sales of the Glock. And nowadays, 65 to 70% of police departments in the United States actually use a Glock. I mean, that's just amazing. Well, over the years, Glocks have changed a little bit in the basic design, more so in recent years. So the first generation looked almost exactly like this one. This is a second generation. It was made in 1990. Glock 19. The only difference between the first and the second generation, the second generation had a different stippling around it. The front strap and back strap got this rough texture. The first gen had pretty much this all the way around. It wasn't too grippy. And this little bar right here, which has the serial number on it, was added, and that was because the ATF required that the frame of pistols have the serial number on like a metal piece somewhere on it, so they needed to do that. So in the late 90s, Glock introduced the third generation pistols. These new pistols had a few changes. To start off with, first was an accessory rail that allowed for a flashlight or a laser to be added. There were wells added on both sides for the thumb, and finger grooves were added in front. The Tenifer coating, which is this coating. Tenifer is a ferric nitrocarbonizing technique that case hardens metal to make it extremely strong and wear resistant. Was a little different on the third gen. Actually, so this is matte right here. The third gens, it was a little more glossy and slick. Some people complained about it. I didn't particularly like it that much. I like the matte better. Later, not long after that, only a few months, the third gens got another modification, and that was to the extractor, which doubled as a loaded chamber indicator after that. And the locking block, which is this bit right here, was enlarged, and there was an extra pin added to cope with higher stresses, like plus P ammunition. It was just so it would last longer, pretty much. Also, the frame, you can get the frame in either black or olive drab in the third gens. They also added the non-firing R models, which came in a bright red frame, and the simunition models, which came in a bright blue frame. And if you don't know what simunition is, it looks exactly like this. This is actually a fired one. I just picked up the paint part and put everything back together. It's basically paintball. It's meant for realistic training of police and military. Now in 2010, Glock announced that it was making a fourth generation model. And this was the biggest change yet. The changes included a new, rougher textured frame, interchangeable back straps, so if you had a smaller hand, you could put a smaller one on there. If you had a bigger hand, you could put a larger one on there. A new reversible magazine release, it was also larger, and a dual recoil spring, and that was to reduce perceived recoil. I can't comment on it because I've never fired a Glock Gen 4 because I'm in California and those are not certified here. I'll explain more of that later. Now the dual recoil spring was not new to fourth generation pistols per se. The subcompact versions, I believe the Glock 27 and 26, not the Glock 27, I believe it was the Glock 26 was one of them. They already had those in the third gen, but now all the fourth gens that were coming out had that new dual recoil spring. And also the original Tenifer coating was brought back to matte, which is nice. The biggest change that was a problem to most people, a lot of parts were not interchangeable from older models. The magazines now would not work if you had a left-handed magazine. They knew that the magazines were double. They have these two mag catches right here for if you wanted to switch it. And the slides were not replaceable with older models because of the new spring. There were a number of changes, and people really didn't like that. The only thing that has happened since they came out, in 2011, there was a recoil spring exchange program to ensure the pistol operated properly. It wasn't a recall, but it was just, if you had a model that was made before a certain time, I think it was July 2011 or something, you should get the new spring because it would work properly for longer. So before I get on to the review portion, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different calibers and models. There are currently 21 different Glock models. The sizes are standard, compact, subcompact, slimline, and competition. Standard is a little bit bigger than this, like the Glock 17. This is a compact version. Subcompact is just smaller and a little thinner frame. The slimline was an extremely thin frame. There's only one of them. I think it's the Glock 36. Pretty sure it's called the Glock 36. And then the competition models, which just had higher standards with the barrel, and it was a little longer barrel length. There are 7 calibers to choose from, and those are, so you can see, 380, 9mm Parabellum, 357 SIG. I don't have a 357 SIG gun, so I don't have any ammunition for it, but I have fired one, and I have some brass. And 357 SIG is just a neck-down version of 40 S&W, which is another Glock caliber. And the beauty of these two calibers, if you have a Glock that fires 40 S&W or 357 SIG, you can just get new barrels for it, exchange it, and you'll be able to fire 40 cal out of a 357 SIG Glock, which is beautiful. That's great. I mean, it makes everything cheaper. If you want, say you have, I think it's a Glock 33 is the 40 caliber one, or maybe that's the 357 SIG. I don't know. If you have one or the other, you can just buy a new barrel and just get a brand new gun, pretty much. Then there's 10mm auto, which is a upcased version of 40 S&W. You can't exchange it between those two. The case is too long for that. There's also 45 ACP, well-known round, and then one I've never fired before, or even seen. That's 45 GAP, or 45 GAP, stands for Glock Automatic Pistol. It's just a little higher pressure and shorter version of 45 ACP, and that was just to accommodate for, they could make a smaller Glock, more compact Glock, but with the same characteristics as the 45 ACP. Alright, now for the review portion. I got this from a gentleman who bought it for home defense, and he really didn't fire it that much. He said he maybe fired 100 rounds out of it. So it was in great condition when I got it, and he cleaned it very well. It was made in 1990, February to be exact. It weighs around 21 ounces, a little under that. Has a 4-inch barrel, and this one was made in Austria. It came with 2 15-round magazines. Now, if you live in a state like California, which is where I live, you're not allowed to buy new high-capacity magazines that are over 10 rounds. And the reason I am able to have these is because I got them before the ban. So these are completely legal. The thing is, I really don't even use all 15 rounds. Like when I'm at the range, I don't put 15 rounds in there. It's just because it's hard to load that many. So I put 10 or 12 rounds in there. So it's not a big deal for me. I don't conceal carry either, so once again, not a big deal for me. But if you live in another state and you buy a brand new Glock 19, you'll get the 2 15-round magazines. In California and some other states that have the ban, you will get 2 10-round magazines. Now, this thing shoots like a dream, and it's one of my favorite range guns. Now, it doesn't have the best trigger. I wouldn't say it's the most accurate. Now, I'm not accurate enough to really determine that, but there are more accurate versions of pistols. But it's my favorite range gun because, one, it's cheap to feed. 9mm is relatively cheap. And it's also probably the easiest gun I have to clean. I can clean this in about, 3 minutes, maybe less. It's just that easy, which is awesome. If you come up from the range and you're tired, you have no excuse not to clean this thing. You just clean it and you're done in a couple minutes. Back to the trigger pull. It's about around 5.5 pounds for all Glocks, which is very nice. It's uniform across the board. I don't know about the competition models, but all the other models, all the 19 models, the trigger pull is 5.5 pounds. Overall, very well built. I've never had any problems with it. The only problems I've ever had have come from people limp wristing, and that causes it to not cycle properly and not pick up the next round. But that's a user error. I've probably put around 2,000 to 2,500 rounds through it. I don't really count. That was a guess. But no problems. I have to admit, I do like the third generations better. I've only fired second and third gen, but the third generations, with that little well for the thumb, it's so much better for me. But it's not enough to merit me buying a new one. So I'll deal with this one for now. I've never fired a 4th generation model, and that's because I live in California and you can't get them here. You can bring them in if you bought them out of state and you're not a resident, but there's a bunch of complications if you want to buy them out of state and you are a resident. You really can't do that. And they're not going to really be here in California selling them anytime soon. And that's because California law has very specific safety concerns and safety devices that must be in guns. And the one that Glock, actually they didn't even submit the Glock Gen 4s for testing because they knew they'd fail, is this it's this little mechanism called the magazine disconnect. And that means if you don't have a magazine in the gun, you can't pull the trigger to fire. A gun that I can think of off the top of my head that has that is the Ruger Mark III. Take the magazine out, you can't fire it, even with a round in the chamber. Now, Glock is not going to change an entire product line just for California, and they're not going to build a California-specific one. So, they're not going to just bring it here. It's not worth their time and money, which is a bummer. But hopefully, maybe one day, those laws will be lifted, and I'll be able to buy a 4th generation Glock, because they look awesome. Alright, now for the features. Let's see. I'm going to go generation by generation. Now, the 1st and 2nd generation are virtually the same. The only functional difference is the grip. The grip is this pretty much all the way around on the 1st generation models. The 2nd gens have the front and back straps more textured. Let's see. Okay, basic features. These are very basic guns. You might notice there's no external safety, and that's because Glocks have 3 safeties on the inside, and I'll talk about those in a second. Let's see. There is a thumb magazine release. It's a little mushy. It might just be because this is extremely old. I mean, it's 22 years old now, and but it's plasticky feeling, and it just uses a little tiny leaf spring to counter you pushing it. It's not bad enough for me to hate it, but one thing that is kind of a minus in my book. But it's better than a heel or a European style magazine release, which I just hate those. It has a manual slide catch, meaning I can pull the slide back and manually lock it back, unlike the Walther PPKS or the Luger, where you have to insert a magazine. Let's see, the sights. Let's see if I can get those in the camera. Front sight is a white bead, and the rear sight is a white U. I love these sights. They're great for standard sights, but you can pick up night sights, ton of other accessories for these that are really easy for a gunsmith to put on if they have the little device for putting these on. Other than that, they're pretty basic. They're very basic guns. Okay, let's see. 3rd generation. You have the accessory rail, for the lasers or flashlights. You have the finger grooves in the front. You have the wells for the thumbs on both sides. And the ejector doubles as a loaded chamber indicator. With 4th gen, You have the dual spring for reducing perceived recoil. You have the more aggressive texture on the grip, and you have the interchangeable back straps. So let's talk about the safety. So Glock has a safety that he invented called the Safe Action, and it's probably one of the safest ways a firearm can be without being in a bulletproof box. And it has 3 in the inside. Now, if one of those 3 fails, it will not fire. Now, you cannot fire a Glock without pulling the trigger. It's impossible. You can't slam fire these unless you shove a metal pipe through them. There's no real way to fire a Glock without pulling the trigger. So the first safety is this right here. It's a trigger safety. You notice there's this little bit right there. Now, if you don't put your pad of your finger on that and pull, you can't pull the trigger. Now, that's the first safety. Once you begin pulling the trigger, that activates another safety. Now, inside there is a little tiny piece of hardened steel that's in the way of the firing pin. And the firing pin can't go past that. So the act of pulling back on the trigger will push that out of the way of the firing pin. Now, the third and final safety, I should mention before that, striker-fired guns like the Glock, when you rack the slide and load something into the chamber, you're actually not even cocking it fully. It's only at half cock, which is another little safety feature because the spring doesn't have enough tension to actually go forward enough to hit the primer, which is nice because, once again, it can't slam fire. Now, the third and final feature, I have a little crude drawing here. Pardon my terrible drawing skills. Now, this right here is the firing pin, and this is what's called the drop safety, which is the third safety. Excuse me. This is what's called the drop safety, which is the third safety. Now, this little bar right here is actually connected to the trigger bar, which is in turn connected to the trigger. And it follows this path right here, this curved path. So, the way it works is right now, imagine that the gun is loaded and it is in the half cock position. So, imagine this pencil is that bar and my hand is this little beam right here that's connected to the firing pin. So, pulling back on the trigger, it pushes back on the firing pin, tightening the spring, and then moves down, and when it gets low enough, the spring releases its tension and flies forward, striking the primer. Really simple operation, but it's extremely safe. Alright, so let's do a field strip. Now, it's really easy. The easiest, I think, I've ever done. I can't think of anything else that's easier. So first off, you want to make sure there's no magazine in the gun and there's nothing in the chamber. And then you have to make sure that it is decocked. And you can do that by just dry firing. So once that is, all 3 of those are met, you need to pull back the slide about 1/4 inch. Easiest way I do it, you can do this either left or right-handed. I'm going to do it right-handed because I'm right-handed. You just wrap your thumb around this end, put your fingers around the slide, and pull back about 1/4 inch. Then, this is the exact same on the other side. You just pull down on these tabs. Release the slide, push forward. You can set the frame aside. Then you can just take out the spring. It's not under any large amount of tension, so it won't hurt you or fly out anywhere. Pull out the barrel, and there you have it. Most people will never go past this stage for cleaning a Glock. They won't fire it enough. There is a way to disassemble this little cluster right here and the trigger group, but there are plenty of videos on YouTube, and I'm not going to show you because most people will not need to ever do that. So let's talk about a few of the internals. We'll start off with the barrel. So Glock uses what's called polygonal rifling. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Now, they use both hexagonal and octagonal rifling. Octagonal is only used in the .45 caliber ones. But the difference between this rifling and traditional rifling uses lands and grooves, which cut into the lands cut into the bullet to give it that spin. With polygonal rifling, it doesn't actually cut into the bullet. There's just more surface area, which makes a better gas seal. And that allows the expanding gases to more efficiently push out the bullet so it can go quicker. Which goes back to why Glock was able to maintain that 441.5 joules of energy that the Austrian military wanted in their guns with a smaller barrel. So that's one big advantage to polygonal rifling. Now, polygonal rifling is not new, but Glock is one of the first pistol manufacturers, modern pistol manufacturers, to use it again. So one big advantage, the seal is greater. The second big advantage is it does not compromise the thickness of the barrel where the grooves are in the rifling, because it doesn't have grooves, which can be a problem in older guns. Nowadays, it really doesn't matter because we have advanced metals. The one big downside is you cannot use lead cast ammunition in these. It can clog up and it can hurt you or the gun. But there's an easy way around that. If you want to fire cast ammunition because you reload, or you just want to fire cast lead ammunition, you can buy an aftermarket barrel that is traditionally rifled, and you can just pop that in, and there you go. Easy fix. All right. So this right here is what I was talking about. That is the second safety. Now, if you push this right now, this right here, let's bring this little card back in. This right here is the bottom. That's what the thing I was talking about. Right now, I can't push that forward. It's impossible. Now, if I were to pull the trigger, this little bit right here would be forced up, and then you could move the firing pin forward all the way to allow it to strike a primer. Then this little part right here, this block right here, that is the drop safety, and that's this little bit right here that I was explaining earlier. That's the part that moves back this part. I don't think there's much else I can tell. I think that's it. Let's put it back together. It's just as easy to put back together. You just do it in reverse order. Drop the barrel in. You want to take the guide spring, and now you want to have the rounded end forward. You just plop that in. Oop, before I do this, you want to make sure that when you sit this back in, see how there's, let's see if I can get this on camera. See how there's a little like half moon shape right there? You just want to be able to stick the end into that. So it's the second tier down. So you stick that in, rounded end forward, and put it on that second tier. Now, you just want to match up the rails with the slide, pull it back all the way, and voila. That's it. Easiest thing to take apart and put back together. Another thing that I forgot to mention, there is another model. It is called the C model. It stands for compensated. And a compensated anything is when there are vents in the barrel, either holes or little vents, to allow gases upward. And in a Glock, there's a hole cut in the slide, and then there are vents that are cut in the barrel, and that allows escaping gas to move upwards, and that compensates for upwards recoil. So normally when you fire, you get upwards recoil. When you have the compensators, they're also pushing down, so it takes some of that recoil out. It's not perfect, but it helps. All right, I think that's it. I recommend a Glock to anybody. You really can't go wrong with it. If you really hate the plasticky feel, I can't do anything for you and I can't convince you. But they're relatively cheap. You can get a brand new Glock 19 for about $500, maybe a little cheaper. There are tons of calibers. I mean, and everything. I mean, there's those 7 calibers I mentioned. There's enough to fit everybody's needs. For concealed carry, I don't personally conceal carry, but I know people that do with the Glock 19, and they said it's not the best, but they can manage it, even with inside the waistband, which can be uncomfortable. But it's nice to have 15 rounds if you're in a state that can do that. Yeah, I think that's about it. As always, if there's anything I missed or I was wrong about anything, please let me know in the comment section or PM me. My main purpose for this is educating people on it. I want everything to be accurate, so please let me know if there's a problem. Thanks for watching.